This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast, the show that unpacks fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Harrison Zuckerberg, and we're your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing as we provide fantasy advice and biblical encouragement. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry studio in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I encourage you to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. If you haven't become a member yet, today's the day. Go become a member on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Get access to all of our weekly breakouts, and this week's breakout is all about wanting someone else's team. I want your team. I want that player on your team. And so we will discuss that breakout topic in just a moment here on the show. Coming up, we'll also do some fantasy shenanigans. We got to talk about the Miami Dolphins and the fantasy ramifications of what took place when they scored 70 points. We also have to discuss some of the other huge performances around the NFL. Which of these can we expect to continue? And then, of course, what about some of these players that have been struggling? We're 4 weeks in, or 3 weeks in. We've got a decent idea of where some of these players are at. And so we're going to do a little bandwagon riding today. Which of these players are we jumping on? Who are we jumping off? And where are we jumping off? And so we'll have some fun with that. We'll take a look at the waiver wire as well. I know I've been dealing with some injuries. Mike Williams is the latest guy for me. So what do we do? Who do we go snag on the waiver wire? Do we want Josh Palmer? Is that who we want? We'll discuss in just a little bit. But let's jump right in before we say hello to Harrison in just a bit. I want to get into this week's breakout topic where we take a fantasy concept related to the Bible, related to life. And so from a fantasy perspective, I imagine you relate to me with this. So you draft your team, right? We all draft our team and we pick players that we want. But inevitably, there are certain players that we just don't get. We don't end up with on our roster. And when the draft ends, we're so jealous. We envy our league mates because they ended up with Justin Jefferson and we didn't. They got Travis Kelce and we didn't. And so there's just there's a little bit of disappointment, and we're like, oh man, I really wish that I had that guy. And then a few weeks into the season, right? We're 3 weeks in, and all of a sudden we start looking at our own roster and we go, I don't like that running back. He's not doing much yet. Oh, this wide receiver has been such a disappointment. Are you kidding me, Trevor Lawrence? What are you doing? That's my quarterback. And it's like, man, I can't believe I'm stuck with these guys. I wish I had Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. And we start looking at other people's rosters going, man, I'd much rather have his team. I want your team. And then what else do? We evaluate other teams and we go, man, I wish I could acquire that player. So then we start sending trade requests and we're like, I got to do something to get that guy because I want him. The guy on my league mates team, I want him. And so what are we doing here? We're coveting other rosters. We're jealous of how good certain players are doing on other teams' rosters. And really we're taking our own team for granted, or we're discouraged by our own team. We're disappointed by our own team. And here's the deal. Ultimately, we have to keep our eyes on our own team, and we have to make the best decisions we can with what we have in front of us. And we can make good, waiver wire decisions and lineup decisions and all that kind of thing, but we can't worry so much about how well other fantasy managers are doing. Unless, of course, we want to genuinely compliment them or encourage them. Right. But other than that, we got to focus on our own team. And sure, we can make some trades and all that. But this attitude and perspective that oftentimes happens in fantasy, where we want someone else's team or their players, unfortunately translates to our own lives. You know it. I know it. I look at my neighbor's lawn and I envy the green grass that he has. And this plays out in a number of different areas for all of us, whatever it may be for you. You're jealous of somebody else's financial success, jealous of their family situation. You covet their house, their car. You're envious of the vacation that they went on. And so this idea that, man, this guy in my league has a better team. It looks like that in our lives. Man, my buddy, he has a better life. He has a better house, a better job, a better bank account. All of those things, we start allowing ourselves to think that way and notice those things. But ultimately, this isn't the way that God wants us to live. Yes, we can be motivated or challenged, by other people and what they're doing, and go, oh, okay, yeah, I want to, continue to get better and grow and all that kind of thing. But we're commanded not to covet what they have. It's one of the 10 commandments. Exodus 20:17. This is the amplified version. It says, "You shall not covet, that is, selfishly desire and attempt to acquire your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor." So fill in the blank, whatever it is. We're not dealing with oxes today, but whatever it is, what are we coveting? And then why are we coveting those things? What's really going on in our heart? And evaluating that and realizing that envy and jealousy leads to a dead end. It doesn't help us. It doesn't benefit us. It tears us up. It causes us to lack gratitude. And so the flip side of that is actually, asking God to give us a heart of gratitude, to be thankful for what we do have, to make the best decisions with what we've been given, to be good stewards with what we've been given, the gifts that we have, the money that God's allowed us to make, the house to live in, to be thankful for all those things. There's always going to be a better fantasy roster, right? Maybe you're the one guy that's got an unbelievable fantasy roster. You wouldn't change a thing about it. But for the rest of us, there's always a better fantasy roster. There's always somebody that has a better house or better car, whatever it is, a better job. It appears that way. And usually that's not always the case. And here we are, week 3 in the fantasy season. Some of these great rosters right now might not end up panning out anyway. And so we're envious and jealous, and we're just wasting energy in fantasy and in life. And so here are a couple other verses to encourage us today. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. That's Proverbs 14:30. Surely resentment destroys the fool, and jealousy kills the simple. Job 5:2. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice, as James 3:16. And so, here's the deal. We got to keep our eyes on our own team. We got to keep our eyes on our own life. And even beyond that, we got to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and realize that as followers of Jesus, our hearts and lives have been transformed thanks to his grace and love. And so we really don't deserve anything. And we don't, not really. We don't deserve anything. And every good thing comes from God. It's all a blessing. Everything we have, the next breath, is a blessing. We don't deserve it. We're not owed it. And so this idea that, I want what he has. I want this. I should have this. I should have that. No. Here's what Psalm 107:9 says. For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. So all these other things that we want on everybody else's, I want in his life, I want what he has. That's not really what satisfies anyway. What we want is Christ and the soul satisfying love and relationship that we can have with him. And so that's what we want to desire. And so let's be reminded that we do have Jesus. As followers of Jesus, we do have him. And he's the one that we want our greatest desires to be rooted in and our eyes fixed on him. And so when that becomes our heart's posture, then the envy and the covetousness and the jealousy, they go away. And we end up looking at our lives with gratitude and peace and awe because of everything we have in Christ. And so today, let's get rid of the envy and the jealousy. I know it bubbles up. Every time I look out my window and I look at my neighbor's awesome lawn, a little bit of envy comes in. And then more seriously, other things in life that cause us to be, angry or bitter and all that kind of stuff and jealous. Let's let go of that and see all the goodness of God and all the blessings that he's poured on us, and he continues to. So let's focus on those things. And then as far as fantasy goes, in many ways, this is the team we got. So we got to focus on our team and we got to make the most of our team. And so let's talk fantasy football today. And if I think about a couple players that I'm envious of It's kind of like I wish Travis Kelce was on every one of my teams. He's on one of them, but I'm always jealous of teams that know their quarterback and know their tight end, because the rest of us, we're scrambling, right? If we're not getting consistent play at quarterback and tight end, we are scrambling. I'm also jealous of those teams that have a starting quarter or a starting running back who's healthy. That's always nice. It's nice to have a healthy running back. Um, but hopefully the parallel makes sense for us today, and we can implement that in our own lives. But let's bring on Harrison, and just off the bat, Harrison, what players are you jealous of? You look at other teams' rosters, you go, man, I wish I had that guy.
The first guy that comes to mind for me is Keenan Allen, because he is
Ah,
someone that I really wanted going into the season. If you remember back to our wide receivers episode in the offseason, I believe I had him ranked as wide receiver 10 or 11, and you thought that was crazy, Bryce. There was no
yeah.
way he could have another great season left in the tank, now that he's well over 30 years old. And I kind of started to think the same thing when drafts came around. I looked at him in the third round and I went, am I really going to draft Keenan Allen over Jalen Waddle? Or should I take Keenan Allen here instead of getting Mark Andrews at tight end or getting Jalen Hurts at quarterback instead? But taking Keenan Allen early on definitely was the right move for whoever did it in your fantasy league, because he has been awesome this season. And it looks like he's probably only going to get better now that unfortunately Mike Williams is injured and he's just going to have a much larger target share in that offense.
Unless the defenses give him more attention. So that's the other side of it. But we'll talk more about that situation with Mike Williams in just a moment. But another player that I'm really jealous of that I wish I would have gotten, Sam Laporta, the tight end in Detroit. They've got some kind of concerns at wide receiver to a certain extent. Marvin Jones, he's older. Josh Reynolds, a little bit up and down. Of course, I'm on Ross St. Brown. But Laporta is a threat. He is a weapon. He is a rookie. Jared Goff is finding him. He's averaging 16 fantasy points per game. So definitely, yeah, I envy those of you that snagged him. And then I'm also envious of those that got DeAndre Swift. I whiffed on this, and I've always been a DeAndre Swift guy, but I didn't like the rumblings coming out of Philadelphia this offseason and in training camp. And it was just too confusing for me. And so I avoid confusion in fantasy football. And sometimes that bites me. And it's just part of the deal, but it bites me. But I wish that I had DeAndre Swift back-to-back weeks. He's been awesome. And I'm okay with him and Kenneth Gainwell actually sharing the workload. I think that will extend Swift, because injuries are always the issue with him. So if he doesn't have to carry the huge heavy load, but he's still contributing in the passing game and the rushing attack, gets into the end zone every once in a while, fantasy managers are loving life with Swift, and I'm jealous of that. I am. So let's see. Let's kind of, with that in mind, let's talk about some of the other big performances from the week and really what jumped out to us. And this also leads into a little bit of our confession as well. But Davante Adams. Davante Adams, what he did, 42 points, 13 receptions, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, like I said about Keenan Allen, the age concern. It's like, can he really do it again? Can I really trust him for a full season? I don't know. The jury's still out on that. But the Raiders aren't great. Davante Adams is still awesome. He's still got it. So huge day for him. What other players, we'll talk about Dolphins in a little bit, but what other kind of big performances jumped out to you from this weekend?
Yeah, I think Devontae Adams was a huge one because everyone wrote him off a little bit, saying, "Oh, maybe we should draft Garrett Wilson over Devontae Adams." That's looking like a really silly decision right now if you took Garrett Wilson over Devontae Adams this season. So it was good to see him prove himself and remind us that he is a top 3 talent at wide receiver in the league. And then another guy who everyone kind of wrote off is Amari Cooper. Again, getting up
Yeah.
there in age. We talked about, just boring players that people kind of forget, but he was the wide receiver 1 going into the season in Cleveland, an offense that we expected to be really good. Probably is going to throw the ball more now that Nick Chubb is out. So it was nice to see the connection that he had with Deshaun Watson, and he had a monster game this weekend as well.
And Elijah Moore did pretty well as well. So I was pleased with that. I ended up benching him this week, but happy that Deshaun looked better. Jerome Ford is still going to be a factor. For those of you that got excited about Kareem Hunt, I'm sorry. I just don't think there's going to be a lot there. But Ford is legit in as far as, I don't think he's an RB1 type of caliber guy, but RB2, RB3, consistent. Yeah, Cleveland, I think they changed some minds this past week. So that was a nice game for them. And you're right, Amari Cooper for sure. All right, so we got to get to our segment, fantasy shenanigans, and we've waited this long, 15 minutes into the show, to talk about one of the craziest fantasy days ever. So here we go.
Fantasy shenanigans.
What in the world? Miami. I mean, we saw some of this last year. We saw glimpses of it, but this was on a whole new level. Devon Achane. Look at him. Call him Achane. Call him Achane. He's scoring touchdowns every time he touches the ball. Raheem Mostert, left and right, running all over the field. You got Tyreek Hill. He's instant. I think he scored a touchdown within the first 5 seconds, it felt like. I turned on the games. It was like, oh, Tyreek's already scored. Oh, he scored again. There he goes. And so Miami, Tua, they're loving life. They're 3-0. But Harrison, I mean, this was some crazy video game fantasy dreamland. If you had any of these guys, if you were going up against any Dolphins players, forget about it. But how did you respond to the 70-point just flooding of fantasy points?
I think it's really funny to see Mike McDaniels come out and create almost like a Madden team where he just puts all the fastest players in the game on the same team, and it actually works. Because that is how the Dolphins assembled this team. They just drafted and traded for everyone who ran a 4.2 40 at the combine, put them on the same team and said, we are just going to run faster than you and you won't be able to catch us. And that's essentially what Raheem Mostert did. That is what Devon Achane did. And that's what Tyreek Hill has been doing for multiple years, obviously, in the NFL. But the craziest part to me about this is they did all this without Jalen Waddle, who is one of the top wide receivers in the NFL too. Like going into this week, it's like, oh, well, what happens if Patrick Surtain takes away Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins or the Broncos pass rush gets something going against the Dolphins? Doesn't matter because the Dolphins just have too much speed. We'll see what happens when they go up against some maybe better coached teams who will know how to combat that.
Sean Payton, not a good coach team. Is that what you're telling me?
Sean Payton's never been known for his defense. That's all I'm saying. He's great with quarterbacks. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with him and Russ throughout the rest of the season. But I don't know if Sean Payton's ever known as a defensive mastermind in the NFL. But we'll see what happens when the Dolphins, play the Bills and they play some of these tougher defenses in the AFC. But man, it's just crazy to see this like Frankenstein experiment actually work. And I wonder if other teams now will start to look at this and be like, why are we worried about route running or blocking or any of these other skills that offenses need to have? Just get the fast guy, hand him the ball and tell him to run. Like, that's pretty simple if you ask me.
It's pretty good. And what is crazy though about Devon Achane is that I would say 99% of people had him on their bench. And there a lot of guys had him on waiver wire. Like you're looking across your leagues and he's still there. So the bids that will go in for him this week will be unbelievable. I'm sure people will just spend all their fab dollars for him. But I actually picked him up this past week in advance of this game, but I was on my bench. So now the question becomes, do I think that this type of performance is going to happen again, or is this his very best game of the year and now's the time to trade him? And I think it's worth considering because this is such an outrageous game and it's just so hard to replicate. But the Dolphins are capable of doing similar performances throughout the year. It's just, sometimes in fantasy, you want to maximize it. You really do. But then also you hate to give up on that guy if he's going to be consistently productive. So you're taking a gamble one way or the other. But I'm at least willing to consider it. So what's your gut feeling on trying to capitalize? Now, Tyreek Hill, you're not trading him. You know what this is what he is. But Mostert gets injured a lot. So do you trade Mostert right now? That's worth considering. Jeff Wilson's coming back off the PUP list. So does that affect the timeshare of these guys? So it's kind of interesting to consider.
Yeah, I also picked him up or drafted him in a couple leagues and had him on my bench. So I'm loving life right now that I at least have that option of, do I start him? Do I trade him? Do I keep him? I don't have to fight for him on the waivers. But it is an interesting scenario, like you said. If you're in Dynasty, you are super happy about having him because he is going to be unbelievable next year when they probably move on from Mostert. But at least into this season, Mostert has a lot of chemistry and history within the offense. He has the trust of Mike McDaniel. I don't see them just throwing him aside and then giving A-Chain the full workload. But for what we saw this last week, he is just so explosive. I think it would be stupid of them not to at least incorporate him in the offense more going forward. It just remains to be seen how much you are actually going to get from him on a week-to-week basis, because obviously he's not going for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns every single week, but he could be a really nice flex play. It just depends if someone else in your league thinks that he can go for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns every week. I would definitely test the trade waters with him for these next few weeks, see if you can get something back for him. But I also don't think it's bad if you keep him on your roster, because I think he will be productive as the season goes on.
Yeah, Dolphins are another one of those teams that I just sort of avoided the backfield because it was confusing. Like, I remember trying to convince myself that Jeff Wilson was going to be the guy. And then it's like, oh yeah, the rookie, how, when will A-Chain come in and be the guy? And then wait, Mostert's still there. So it's all very confusing. And some of that will continue, but man, when you see what the possibilities are, whoo, that's enticing for fantasy. All right, what other shenanigans kind of took place this week? I got to admit this. Zach Moss and what he's doing since being healthy in Indy, shocking, surprising. Remember, the Bills just kind of gave up on him, shipped him out of town, never really gave him a true shot in Buffalo. And now in Indy, he's doing very well. The Colts are competitive. And Jonathan Taylor, what's going to happen with him? I think with Moss playing this well, it gives them more of an incentive to trade Jonathan Taylor. Now, what teams could be interested in him? Remember, the Dolphins were one of those teams in the offseason. I'm not sure that they go get Taylor at this point after what we just talked about. But Zach Moss, I think he's the real deal. I think he's needed in this offense. They trust him. He's gotten off to a good start. So I'm just surprised by it. The other couple things that jumped out to me, Antonio Gibson continues to be a nightmare. Every time he touches the ball, he fumbles, it feels like. Washington they struggled this past week. He was on the field a good bit. So that was good because they were down, but he just didn't get going. And so he's on that chopping block of, is it time to cut Antonio Gibson? So that he's one of those guys that we had high hopes in, not sure that he's going to come around. And then lastly, how about Andy Dalton? 58 throws. 58. Are you kidding me? But he did have 23 fantasy points. And Harrison, I was going to save this for the end to brag, but Adam Thielen, I pounded the table for Adam Thielen. Guys, the guy can play. He needs a quarterback to throw him the ball. And if he's the number one threat it's the Panthers offense. It's not a great offense, but hey, if Dalton's out there and he's throwing a bunch, and even a couple weeks ago with Monday Night Football, Bryce Young was finding Thielen. Thielen's going to be all right for fantasy managers this year. So hopefully you listened to me this summer, because I love Thielen and glad to see him do as well as he did this past week. So those are some shenanigans. Anything else you want to add, Harrison?
Yeah, I think the Zach Moss situation is really funny, because the whole conflict with running backs in the NFL right now is, do you need a star running back? Do you not? Jonathan Taylor decided he was going to kind of sit out, want a new contract, say, I'm so important to this team. You need me. You won't be the same offense without me. And the Colts go, fine, we'll give the ball to Zach Moss and he can run for 120 yards. It's kind of backfiring against Taylor, because it is proving the Colts and the rest of the NFL's points that we don't need to pay these star guys, because the backup can be just as productive in the same offense. So it'll be really interesting to see now that they have so much leverage when Taylor is healthy off the pop in a week or two. Does he come back and he's the RB1? Does he still decide to try to sit out and hold for a contract? Do they trade him? It's going to be a really interesting situation. And I know Zach Moss owners like myself are really conflicted right now, because logically you would think, okay, Taylor comes back, I should trade Moss this week and get as much value as I can for him before he's just not relevant anymore. But I feel like there's actually a real possibility now that Moss continues to be the RB1, or at least have a sizable role in this offense once Taylor is off the pup, just because we have no idea what is going on with his relationship with the team.
Yeah. And really, on a bigger picture too, the Colts offense, it's night and day from last year. There are multiple guys worth having. And we'll talk waiver wire in a little bit, because there's a guy that I'm targeting this week that we got to take seriously now. So, all right, before we get to some accountability and confession, we got a trade request that just came in a few minutes ago. And I think this is a very worthwhile trade to consider. So Jeb says, should I trade Kyron Williams, Jerome Ford, and Najee Harris for CMC? His other running backs are Kamara, Montgomery, and Stevenson. I'm going to go absolutely yes. Do it. Get CMC. He is a game changer. He is one of one. It's him and Kelsey are sort of the premier at their position. Nobody's touching them. And if I can get CMC, I'm getting them, especially because of the depth that you have with those other three running backs. So, Kyron Williams, the wake up call took place last night against the Bengals defense. Come on, it's not that great. So he struggled. Ford's fine, but you got to give up something. And then Najee Harris, I still don't think he's turned the corner to where we can really trust him. Jalen Warren's still sitting there. He didn't do as much as I would have liked this week. I actually started him in a couple leagues, but I'm not sure Harris is lighting the world on fire. Whereas CMC, we know what he can do. It's awesome. So, all right, what do you think? Yes or no? We'll go quick.
I would completely agree. Any trade where you are getting one of the best players in the NFL without giving up one of the best players in the NFL definitely works. Because CMC to me is just so clear in a way a higher valued running back than any other running back in the league right now. He has no question marks. He's produced every week with this touchdown streak that he is on. And essentially you're giving up two flex players in Ford and Williams, who aren't really locked in as RB2s, but are weekly flexes. And then Najee, we have no idea what's happening. There's so many question marks with him.
Yeah.
Because he's just been so inefficient. Jalen Warren's there as well. He could sort of flip-flop the roles and be replaced as the season goes on. So I think you go for CMC, lock it in, RB1 every single week, just eliminate all the questions. And like you said, with having Kamara coming back this week, you got some more depth. I think you totally pull the trigger on this move.
Speaking of Kamara, the Saints situation is very interesting and worth talking about because I was all in on this offense. They're winning games. They were winning games, and then they let the Packers come back because Derek Carr got injured. But it wasn't that Jameis played poorly necessarily. He gets a revenge game against the Bucs this week. Looks like Carr will at least rest a week. I don't think Kendre Miller necessarily blew us away this past week. Tony Jones Jr. didn't do a ton. So I wasn't sure if either one of those guys would be relevant. It's going to be Kamara, and he's going to come back, and he's going to be very good in this offense. And Jameis likes to throw the ball all over the field. So if he starts the game, I think he's going to be okay. It's not necessarily a huge drop-off. I kind of like the leadership of Carr, and I think he's just a little bit more stable back there for the Saints long-term, as the season goes on. But I'm still in on all these guys. Olave, so legit. We both were in on him. He's having an awesome season. But can we please throw the ball to Juwan Johnson? Come on. Seriously? We're throwing to Jimmy Graham? Jimmy Graham stole a touchdown from our boy, Juwan Johnson. It's terrible. So maybe this sound drop seems fair.
And now, what's boiling Bryce?
I went all in on Juwan Johnson this year. He's so talented. He got a couple catches when Jameis came in. But how does Jimmy Graham? He retired. He wasn't out of the league. I mean, so anyway, that fired me up on Sunday. I couldn't believe that happened. But I would buy Kamara coming back. That's my big takeaway from all of that. Anyway, so at least I got what's boiling Bryce off my chest. So thank you for that. All right, a little bit of accountability and confession today, as we like to do on this show, where unlike some shows, we actually admit when we're wrong. We don't pretend like we have all the answers, like some people do. We whiff, but overall, my fantasy teams are doing well. I've got one team that continues to just hit the injury bug. I mean, Nick Chubb, Mike Williams, Derek Carr, forget about it. That team's a disaster, but for the most part, doing okay. However, I have been wrong about a number of things, and I have to confess that I totally avoided the Arizona Cardinals. I thought they were a dumpster fire, but how about James Conner? James Conner was such good value in drafts. If you were willing to buy into him, he's been good. Marquise Brown has still been relevant. Josh Dobbs, was last week a fluke? 2 weeks ago. Was that a fluke? No, he came back and played well again. They beat the Cowboys. This unbelievable defense, the greatest defense we've ever seen. They're unstoppable because they beat the Giants and the Jets. They can't beat the Cardinals. But I was wrong about the Cardinals. And so James Conner, 14 carries, 98 yards, touchdown. Where have you been wrong? What do you need to admit, Harrison?
The biggest point of accountability for me is Justin Fields. I've officially given up
3 weeks in a row, buddy.
any sort of hope or reason that Justin Fields is going to have his breakout season this year. It's not like, okay, he's gone against some tougher defenses, but he just looks like he has no idea what he is doing on the football field. They will snap the ball and he will sit back there for 10 seconds, not throw to anyone, not take off because he's being coached to take sacks, apparently. I don't know any offense that has ever told the quarterback, stand back there, don't throw it, and don't run, even though you're probably the best rushing quarterback in the NFL outside of Lamar Jackson. If you have Justin Fields on your team, he is unstartable. I wouldn't necessarily say cut him because he could still provide value as a backup some weeks, but do not start him. Fool me once, shame on you, Justin Fields. Fool me twice, shame on me, and fool me 3 times, you're sitting on my bench for the rest of the season. I can't take this anymore. I'm done with him. The Caleb Williams hype train for the Chicago Bears has officially started. I know that we had Tank for Tua a few years ago. We got to come up with some sort of term for Caleb. But yeah, Justin Fields, man, it's rough.
Disappointing. It is, because we were excited about this offense, a couple different options, and I'm not real eager to get any of those guys. It's they do get the Broncos this week though, so there is some hope. There is some hope there. Here's another guy that I was totally wrong about. I mean, Joshua Kelly, he was great in the preseason. He got the last 2 games as the starter. He was awesome first week with Austin Eckler, and then he was the starter the last 2 weeks, and he can't gain any yards. Now the Chargers gave up on the run. All they did was throw all day long. But Joshua Kelly, 11 times for 12 yards, unacceptable. So I apologize. I was wrong. I've been starting him. Not good. Big whiff on that, on his part. And then also, you and I disagreed on Juju Smith-Schuster. And through 3 weeks, I'm very wrong. So I admit I was wrong. Not to say that he couldn't get going at some point, but the passing attack in New England is just so unpredictable, and he doesn't seem to be a key part of that. So I whiffed on that. And then I still feel like the jury's out on Jordan Love, but I have to admit that, all right, I probably was a little wrong on him. That was a nice comeback win for them. They've had a lot of injuries, yet they're still competitive. They're playing well. Other guys are stepping up, and he's been solid. So, not a huge day for Jordan Love, 249 yards, but he threw for a touchdown, rushed for a touchdown. He's not horrible. He's not horrible. I'm not sure you're going to start him every week, but
which is weird for me as a Bears fan, because in the offseason, I had a lot of faith and thought Jordan Love was going to be a promising quarterback this year. And Packers fans were so out on him and just hated the idea that Jordan Love was going to be their starting quarterback this season instead of Aaron Rodgers or, Brett Favre. Oh my gosh, you don't have Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers as your starting quarterback. Life is so horrible. I wonder what it would be like being a Bears fan where we haven't had a quarterback in 50 years. So it felt really weird being a Bears fan and telling Packers that they have a great quarterback, and having me the voice of reason for Packers fans to have optimism. But yeah, Jordan Love has come out and he has been great. And a lot of the weapons, he's done all this without Christian Watson as well in that offense. He's done it with Romeo Doubs. He's done it with Luke Musgrave. He's done it without Aaron Jones as well. So his top 2 playmakers have been out and the Packers have been winning, and he has been having good games.
Absolutely. We got to give it to him. So, even though they blew it the other day against Atlanta, that was a bad one for them. All right. So let's move on to discussing the waiver wire, some injuries, and how we respond and where we go from here. And then we'll ask Harrison if this guy is legit. We started this segment because a couple years ago, Harrison accidentally said legit. And so now we stick with it. So here we go. So the Chargers, we got to talk about the Chargers and the wide receiver tight end situation. So Donald Parham, I mean, this guy's been stealing. He's a vulture. 2 catches, 2 touchdowns this past week. Is he legit?
I do not think that he is legit. I think he will definitely catch some more touchdowns as the season goes on. But the one thing that Donald Parham has working for him is that he is 6'8" and playing tight end in the NFL. So if there's ever been a jump ball threat, it is Donald Parham. Just on the goal line, throw it up to him. None of the 5'11" DBs are going to be able to get their hands anywhere near his catch point. So I think he will definitely have some more, I guess, fantasy relevant weeks purely because of vulturing, but I don't think you will ever see a 7 receptions for 80 yards game from Donald Parham.
That's like maybe that 1 week you're tough on buys. You need to stream guys. That's fine. That would be, but I wouldn't run out and get him on the waiver wire. So the wide receiver position with Mike Williams going down. We talked highly of Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert. We love him. He's on 3 of my rosters. I love Herbert. Huge day for him. But Mike Williams was awesome before he got hurt. And so I went in on Mike Williams. I'm bummed that he's injured, but now I've got to pivot. So is Josh Palmer the answer? Is Quentin Johnson the answer? I would say yes. I mean, both of these guys should be rostered now. I would say as the season goes on, the upside, the excitement of the rookie is intriguing. But Josh Palmer's been there. He's been a part of the offense. I think he outplayed Johnston in the offseason. We went into the season with Palmer as the third guy. So now he's the second guy. Does he have the upside? Probably not. Even last year when he had some opportunities, he didn't necessarily take full advantage of it, which is somewhat concerning. But for me, I'm desperate. So I've got to go get Josh Palmer and do my best to snag him on my roster. But Quentin Johnson in my one key league is already on a roster. But if you have the option between both, what side do you go, Harrison? And what do you make of the Chargers situation?
I would personally target Palmer to start off because I think you could take him and immediately play him as your wide receiver 2 or flex and be happy with his production next week because he's been there, he's produced, and he has been on the field so far this season, which is really important. He's been playing about 70% of the snaps each week, where Quentin Johnson has only been playing about 15 or 20% of the snaps. So obviously that will increase now that he's getting moved up to the wide receiver 3. But I would definitely look at Palmer first. He's definitely has the trust and the connection with Justin Herbert. But I think both guys are definitely worth a shot. If one of them already is rostered, go get the other one. But I would have Palmer as my priority in that offense.
All right. Speaking of rookie wide receivers, Josh Downs, Indianapolis wide receiver. We know Michael Pittman's been playing well. Alex Pierce, not necessarily reliable as much. But Josh Downs, this past week, 8 receptions. So he had more fantasy points than DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Zay Flowers, Puka, everybody's favorite Puka Nuka, George Pickens. So is Josh Downs legit?
I would say that he is. Josh Downs was a very talented wide receiver in college. And the only question really was he going to get an opportunity in the Colts offense? Because even though the Colts don't have amazing receivers, they had a lot of guys there. They had Michael Pittman, obviously. Alec Pierce was coming back from last year. They signed Isaiah McKenzie in the offseason. But Downs has really established himself as the number 2 in that offense. I think he's a really talented player. So he should definitely have a role going forward. And then the last guy that I want to mention on waivers, another rookie who I think could provide some value, is Roschon Johnson for the Chicago Bears. Now, obviously the Bears have been a mess these first 3 weeks, but they have to change something. And could that be giving the rookie running back, more of the ball carries over Khalil Herbert in the offense? So far in the limited work he's had, he's averaged 5.4 yards per carry this season. And he's actually 3rd on the team in receptions. He has 10 receptions. So if the Bears continue to struggle, I would not be surprised if they throw the rookie in there as the full-time RB1 just to see what he has as the season goes down the line. So I would get him on your bench now before he puts up that monster week and everyone's trying to get him on the waiver wire.
Absolutely. That's a good get ahead of it if you can type of guy for sure. All right, let's have a little fun. We're going to do some bandwagon riding, and we got to figure out what guys are we excited about, what guys are we concerned about. Here we go.
Get off the bandwagon.
It's time for bandwagon riding. Getting on, getting off. Make up your mind, all right?
All right, let's run through a few names here. Let's start with Calvin Ridley. So he burst onto the scene week 1 for Jacksonville. And then the last 2 weeks, he has struggled. I mean, he's dropping passes. He only had 3 catches for 40 yards this past week. Are you jumping off the Calvin Ridley bandwagon?
I am going to jump off the Calvin Ridley bandwagon because I
Ooh.
don't think he is the wide receiver to have in Jacksonville anymore. I think after 2 strong weeks in a row by Christian Kirk, I think it is very 1A, 1B there, which is something that, we talked about in the offseason. Christian Kirk being undervalued, he was still going to have a role in the offense. So I do not think it is worth going all in on Calvin Ridley when there is another guy there who is probably just as good.
So Aaron leaves a message. He says, should I trade Ridley for Josh Allen, Ayuk, and Mike Evans? Come on, that can't be a trade someone's willing to make. Of course. Yes. That sounds tremendous. I want to be in your league. I like that. Yes, do that trade. I know Josh Allen. I mean, he's been fine, but he had a nice game against Washington. But I'm not sure people are looking to give up Josh Allen. Man. All right, let's do some bandwagon riding. This seems obvious, but we got to talk about jumping on this bandwagon. We mentioned him last week. Tank Dell. Houston Texans wide receiver, 5 passes, 145 yards, 1 touchdown, and he was targeted 7 times. Now, you know that I've been on the Nico Collins bandwagon, and I'm on the CJ Stroud bandwagon, and I'm on the Tank Dell bandwagon. What about you?
I am also on the Tank Dell bandwagon. Last week, we said that he was going to have a role in this offense and that he was a great player. I didn't know that he was this great and was just going to be torching defenses left and right here. I mean, he was explosive in college. I know all too well going to SMU that he put the work on SMU a few times when we played Houston. So I'm definitely on the Tank Dell bandwagon. He is going to be a great player in the NFL. He looks like he has what it takes.
Yes, no question. All right, we got to talk Jets. A couple guys we could mention whether we're jumping on or off, but Breece Hall, 18 yards, 12 carries, and we saw him week 1, burst onto the scene, loving life, and then now the last 2 weeks struggling. But as we know, it's the Zach Wilson effect, and the Jets are struggling overall. And so, what do we do with Breece Hall? Do we jump off the bandwagon? I was never really on the bandwagon because I just didn't know what to do with the Jets. And so I avoided the Jets for the most part. So I'm not facing this, but what do you tell people? Do you jump off the bandwagon, try to trade Breece Hall?
Yeah, I was never on the Breece Hall bandwagon either, just because I was concerned with the injury. ACL injuries are never good for a running back to come back the next year. So I would stay off of the Breece Hall bandwagon, especially now that it doesn't look like the Jets are going to be scoring many points for the rest of the season. When you were trying to convince yourself as a Jets fan that bringing in Carson Wentz is going to be better than what you currently have at the quarterback position, that is a scary scenario to think about. I don't know if anyone has ever thought that Carson Wentz was going to be the one to take them to the promised land within the last few years. I mean, the Colts thought it, and then the Commanders thought it. But so I guess maybe the Jets will drink the Carson Wentz Kool-Aid as well. But man, I don't think I would want anyone that is on the Jets on my fantasy roster right now. I mean, even Garrett Wilson, he's so talented, but it's tough to start him in your fantasy lineup every week, knowing that he doesn't really have anyone to throw him the ball, which is a really important part about being a wide receiver in the NFL.
Did you see him mouth on the sideline? He can't. What did he say? He can't throw it, or he can't throw the ball, or something.
Yeah,
not good. You don't want your wide receiver saying stuff like that on the sideline. Yeah, I jump off the bandwagon all around. But I think if you have Garrett Wilson, you have to start him. He's too good not to start, which is always a bummer. And I think even Derrick Henry owners, I'm jumping off that bandwagon. Jump on the Tyjae Spears bandwagon. You've been hearing me talk about it for the last month or so. But yeah, tough day for Henry as well. But again, it's like if you got Henry, you got to start him. But man, that puts you in a tough spot. It really does. That's why I go back to my theory. I don't like losing guys for the year, but I'm not. If Nick Chubb is out, he's out. So now I got to adjust. But when you have a guy like Derrick Henry, who you're so invested in, he's your first or second round pick, you got to keep playing him. But if he's not performing, he's just sort of killing your team. So it's a really tough thing that happens in fantasy. Last bandwagon question. Are we jumping on, off Ramondre Stevenson, Zeke Elliott? What's going on with the running game in New England? Elliott looked great, or had a nice day stat-wise. I didn't necessarily watch him. But Stevenson hasn't gotten off to the big start that many fantasy managers expected him to.
I'm going to stay off the New England bandwagon. I think this team is a mess. They barely beat the Jets, which we just talked about how horrible the Jets were. So that's kind of impressive to play the Jets that closely. Yeah, I would not be putting a lot of faith in any New England weapons. I have come around to Hunter Henry, which I know is your guy, and you've pounded the table for him. But for the running backs and receivers there, yeah, I'm off the New England bandwagon.
Oh man, we could have asked if this guy was legit. I've already forgotten his name, but the other tight end in New England caught a touchdown. I was watching the game with a buddy. It's like, oh, there goes Hunter Henry. Oh, let's go. That's not Hunter Henry. Who is that? Get him out of here. So that was I had to take back my fist bump. It was you hate that moment where you're celebrating someone's big play and it's not the guy that you think it is. So it doesn't happen too often to me, but that was a big whiff. That was not Hunter Henry. I'm not sure who the other guy was, but we'll see if we see him again. All right. As we wrap up the show, we've mentioned a few guys. Listen, we try to confess and hold ourselves accountable, but every once in a while, it's nice to celebrate a few of the players that we've been talking about as being high fantasy performers, the guys that we've pounded the table for. And so anybody you want to mention, brag about here as we end the show, Harrison, I'm loving life with Justin Herbert, Adam Thielen, even though CJ Stroud, I can't say that I bought into him as a fantasy quarterback, but I wanted the Panthers to draft him instead of Bryce Young. So I will celebrate that at least through 3 weeks. That feels like the better take. But now I've got to say, Stroud should be a legitimate fantasy consideration. He's most likely on benches at this point, but if he's still on your waiver wire, I would definitely snag him. So I've been on kind of that Texans bandwagon and feeling pretty good about that, even though they're not necessarily going to win a ton of games. That was impressive for them. But what happened to Jacksonville? Are you kidding me? That was that was unacceptable. I am concerned about Trevor Lawrence. I will say that. I'm going to stay on the bandwagon. I'm going to continue to start him, but there is some concern there. But as far as bragging, anybody else that you want to mention that you feel good about?
Yeah, I mean, one guy I want to brag about, which I don't know how deserved it is because we knew he was going to be this good, but it feels so nice having Justin Jefferson on your fantasy team where he has scored over 24 fantasy points every single week this season. We're talking about, oh, wow, Amari Cooper had a great game. He put up 25 points. Yeah, that's a down week for Justin Jefferson. Like, it's really nice to get the number one pick right, which you could have gone so many ways, like not going with Jamar Chase or Christian McCaffrey, who's also been great. But it's definitely nice having the wide receiver one and knowing what you're going to get from him every single week. So I'll just throw a shout out to Justin Jefferson there. I feel like he doesn't get enough love. No one ever talks about Justin Jefferson enough. Like I almost forgot that he was playing in the NFL. It's not like he's in every single commercial that comes on.
That's right. How are you going to feel though when the Vikings lose to the Panthers this weekend and all of a sudden the Vikings go, you know what? Maybe we should trade Kirk Cousins to the Jets. Is that going to happen? It seems outrageous. You're like, come on, no way. The NFL is crazy. We'll see. If the Vikings get off to this terrible, they've already off to a bad start, and they start thinking about, hey, Kirk isn't our guy for the future as good as he is. He's been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this year. The Jets offer him a nice little package. They think, hey, we could win the Super Bowl with this roster. We had Kirk Cousins. I know it's being talked about a little bit. But then what happens to Justin Jefferson? Then we're so enjoy it, celebrate it now. I don't know. We'll see.
One last thing about the Jets too, because we were talking about bandwagons before. Do we see guys hop off the bandwagon in real life? Because when you look at Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard, they both hopped off the Packers bandwagon to follow Aaron Rodgers to the Jets bandwagon. Now they're stuck with Zach Wilson. Do we see both those guys be like, hey, Aaron, kind of sorry, but I'm requesting a trade to go back to the Packers. This Jordan Love guy that they got back there isn't too bad. I don't know why I ever left him in the first place to come here to New York.
Oh, they blew it. Especially Lazard, who's, he was fantasy relevant and all that. Good luck, man. It's going to be a tough season there unless they make a big change. We'll see. All right. Well, great show today. Enjoyed it. Thanks, Harrison. Good stuff. Good comments from the chats today. And so appreciate that. Some interesting trade requests thrown out there. So good luck with your trades. This is a good week to trade. Heading into week 4, you got a decent pulse first 3 weeks. So good luck. That could be fun. I'm going to be exploring some things. Don't give up on your season yet. It's so early. If you've been hit by the injury bug, guess what? Other managers are going to be hit in a few weeks. So get ahead of some of these guys on the waiver wire, load up on some backup running backs. They're going to get a chance. They will. Look out for it. Unfortunately, injuries continue to be the story as always. But appreciate you listening. Be sure to become a member on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Go read about the breakout. Today we talked about envy, jealousy, coveting someone else's fantasy roster, and then how we become jealous in life for somebody else's life, their team, the players on their roster. That's what we want. And we're jealous of their house, their family, their money, whatever it may be. But is that really benefiting us to have that attitude and that what's the heart issue that's going on there? Let's be filled with gratitude and peace as we thank God for all that he's given us. Most importantly, we have Jesus. And so that gives us the gratitude. We don't need anything else. That's all we need. But do we have that perspective? And we have to remind ourselves not to get caught up in the jealousy and the envy of everybody else and all these other things. So I hope that's encouraging to you. But we'll talk to you next week, Lord willing. I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan and fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected. And through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well. And I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans and fantasy managers who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.